Good morning, everyone. My name is Fiona Sanderson, and I am the marketing manager here at My HR Toolkit. So firstly, I'd just like to welcome you all to today's webinar. See, it's a popular topic. We've got some customers that have joined us, and there's some new faces here as well today. So just like to welcome everyone today. So for those of you who are new to us, My HR Toolkit provides HR software for SMEs, and we run an ongoing programme of webinars covering a variety of HR and business topics. So today we'll be discussing business compliance and specifically how SMEs can recruit lawfully. So in this bite-sized webinar for SMEs, we'll be touching on the legal obligations around recruiting, recruitment and discrimination, and fair and inclusive recruitment strategies. So following the presentation, which will last around 20 minutes, we'll have time to answer some of your questions in a Q&A. So on your Zoom menu at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box. So if you can post your questions there, and then we will cover those off at the end of the webinar. And also you'll see the Zoom chat. So feel free to get involved with the chat as we go along. And just to note that today's session is offering general and not legal advice. Just to let you know as well, we've got if you're interested in more compliance topics, we've got 2 more webinars coming up on the 6th and the 20th of April. The first is on achieving employee compliance in your small business. And the second one is having great HR policies and procedures for your SME. So if you look in the chat, we will post the links to those. And we've also got an introductory HR compliance guide for SMEs, which outlines some of the essential areas that you need to look at for in-office and remote employees. So here to talk to us this morning about lawful recruitment for SMEs is Toby Pochron. So Toby's an experienced employment law solicitor with over 12 years experience working in employment law. He regularly advises businesses on implementing pragmatic and commercial employment law advice, and he works as managing associate in the employment law department at the national law firm Freeths. So without further ado, I shall hand you over to Toby. Good morning, Toby.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Fiona. So welcome everybody. Thank you very much for having me along. So if you could just clip over to my my very first slide.
Sure.
On my old headphones there. Amazing. Yeah, so my topic today is business compliance. It's lawful recruitment for SMEs. So again, if you clip over to the slide that's got the rundown to, amazing. This is the overview of the session. So when My HR Toolkit first asked me to be involved in this, I saw that it was 20 minutes long, and that was to my absolute horror, mainly because I can't shut up about stuff. And I love topics like discrimination. I love doing business plans and business modelling. So trying to reduce this down into a 20-minute session has been fairly tricky for me because I do have a tendency to go on. So what I'd say is throughout this, I do tend to speak a bit quickly, and I have had that feedback before. So if you want the slides with the notes on that I'm going to be reading from on the top of my screen here, please do email me afterwards, and it's got all the notes. It'll have all the content in that I'm covering as well. So an overview of the session today. So the legal obligations around recruiting employees, recruitment and discrimination, fair and inclusive recruitment strategies, and we're going to finish off with a Q&A. As Fiona said, if you can stick any questions in the Q&A box as we go through, it'll be on the topic on the screen, whack it in there, and I'll cover it at the end. And we'll do it as a bit of a free flow session. So next slide, please. And I absolutely love saying next slide, please, each time too. So we're going to start off with a quick poll, if that's okay. So bring the poll up, please. So do you believe that your organization's efforts to promote diversity in recruitment are sufficient? Yes or no? And I can't answer this on my screen. So we currently have no one answering. So the poll isn't allowing us to choose. Okay, no one can respond to it. That's no trouble. Tell you what, let's close the poll down, and I'll move on. Move on to the next bit. Now, the first part of my notes on screen says these results are really interesting. So they were really interesting. But the reason that I was asking it was that within organizations can be a tendency to think, well, actually we do enough. We do enough towards lawful recruitment because we have a good process in place, we have good managers, and we know sort of what they're doing. But actually, a 2020 report by the survey company Milkround found that 66% of students and graduates surveyed did not believe that their employers recruited a truly diverse workforce, despite the fact that 59% of employers believe their efforts to promote diversity in recruitment were sufficient. So we'll probably go for the fact that likely about 2/3 would have said that, what, yeah, I think we do enough. And then maybe a third would have said, well, actually, no, maybe we've got some work to go. So the legal obligations around recruiting employees, I'm going to cover these in turn here. So discrimination in employment law, even when looking specifically at recruitment, is a really large topic. So I'm going to try and go for the sweet spot here and not hammer too much information into my 20-minute slot. I'm going to give you the key aspects to consider as part of a lawful recruitment program. So briefly, all individuals who are job applicants or who consider applying to a role are protected from being discriminated against on the grounds of their protected characteristics. And that's throughout the entirety of the job application process, from the drafting of the initial job advert right the way through up to selection criteria. This means that employers have an active obligation to ensure that discrimination does not occur to candidates anywhere from reading the job advert to engaging in the interview process. The European Commission on Human Rights makes the following recommendations to employers when recruiting and promoting generally. Define the selection criteria for your role in terms of measurable skill, measurable experience, measurable knowledge, and objective qualities. So take subjectivity completely out of it. Reach the widest possible candidate pool by using a range of recruitment methods and also positive action to recruit from potentially unrepresented areas. Provide a clear brief, including diversity targets to any recruitment companies that you might use, and assess candidates against the role specification in a consistent way throughout the process. And I'll add to this list by saying that the way in which you achieve those aims is to document everything. All the questions that are used, all the answers that are provided, all the notes that are produced, how in which you're going to go through this process, how are you going to monitor, make sure that you are engaging in a non-discriminatory recruitment exercise, is to document everything throughout. Discrimination, if brought as a claim in the employment tribunal, has substantial costs to employers associated with it, but also in avoiding those, you assure that you recruit in a non-discriminatory manner, and also that's going to ensure that you have a diverse workforce. Now, there are data protection issues when it comes to recruitment as well. So job applicants provide actually quite a substantial amount of personal data and sometimes a heavy amount of special category data as well to employers. And employers in turn will process that data. You might get a CV out of the blue. When that CV comes into you, actually you're processing data from outside of your organization. So question to consider as part of your compliance program with UK GDPR is, how does an employer deal with the personal data it receives from job applicants? How does the employer conduct equal opportunities monitoring as part of a recruitment exercise? And at the end of the recruitment exercise, what does the employer do with the information that it's received? It's gone are the days where you can just say, we'll hold your CV on file in case we might have something for you in the future. You have to have a documented retention plan in place for those CVs that you receive. If managers within your organization are receiving CVs out of the blue, you have to understand what they're doing with those. They can't simply be stored on your system. They might have someone's health data on it, or be stored in email. That can be inherently unsecure. You'd have to have a policy in place for what you're going to do with that. So it's important to make job applicants aware of what data is going to be processed, how their data will be processed, and how long the employer will hold that information for. You can do all of that on a candidate privacy notice that can be posted on your website or sent out to an automated basis to those who apply for the role. Now, you have to have the right to work checks in place for recruitment. It's unlawful to employ someone who does not have the right to reside and the appropriate right to work in the UK or is working in breach of their conditions of stay. I'm not an immigration lawyer, so I do mention this really for completeness. It's a very specialist area of law. If you would like some assistance, just let me know and we can put you in touch with an immigration lawyer within Freeths. But I think one of the most invaluable tools that I've seen recently is undertaking equal opportunities monitoring. So this is a monitoring tool that you use to ensure that your recruitment processes and your policies are fair. Now, I've seen these be ordered by an employment tribunal judge as part of a discrimination claim. I've also seen them be asked for. So we have a claim in that comes from someone that says, actually, I wasn't recruited because I'm pregnant. And a judge might say to you, well, how do you know that your recruitment policy was effective? How do you know unless you've monitored and checked to see whether or not that process that you're using has non-discriminatory criteria? Where's your equal opportunities monitoring form? You know, not having that leaves you somewhat exposed, but putting it in place can have a number of good benefits as well, not simply just risk management. A lot of what I say comes from a risk management aspect of it, but it's not meant to be like that. It can be a lot more practical, and also it gives real benefit to a business. So equal opportunities monitoring of protected characteristics of job applicants are used to establish whether or not your equality policy is effective in practice. You can analyze the effect of the other policies and practices on different groups or individuals. You can highlight possible inequalities and investigate the underlying causes. And you can also set targets and timescales for reducing that disparity as well. But also it sends a clear message. You use equal opportunities monitoring to tell job applicants, workers, employees that equality and diversity issues are being taken seriously within the organization. And you might find that monitoring can reveal things. So monitoring reveals things like applicants with a particular religion or belief are not being selected for internal promotion. And you can assess why that is and take steps to remedy it. Maybe there's a higher concentration of women in certain jobs or different departments. Again, does that need remedy? What steps are we going to take in order to seek advancement of those job roles? People within a particular ethnic group might not even apply for employment, or fewer might apply than expected. If disparities are found, employers should investigate the possible clauses in each case and take steps to remove those barriers. That can be a continuing process that can shape the way in which you recruit employees. But the first step to take is to have a proper recruitment policy in place, training provided for managers, and then assess the effectiveness of those procedures. So if we click over to the next slide, please.
Toby, I'm just going to jump in because we've fixed the poll, so we'll just launch that again. See if we can get some.
I imagine the results will be very interesting.
You should see that now on your screen.
Thanks. Those results are interesting, yeah, and it's pretty much in line with the report that Milkround said as well. So yeah, so 59% of employers believe that they've done enough, even though 66% of people who are applying for jobs think there's not enough done. Interesting. That is interesting. I'm glad I got that. Thank you for bringing that one up. Cheers. So I'm gonna look a little bit more about the dangers that lie in getting a recruitment process wrong. So the clearest risk, and one that I do focus on kind of throughout this process, is discrimination. So discrimination against a job applicant. Now the Equality Act itself from 2010 makes discrimination and harassment unlawful in relation to 9 protected characteristics. Those are the ones on screen. So age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage, civil partnership, pregnancy, maternity, race, religion or belief, sex, and sexual orientation. Those protected characteristics are defined in numerous different ways as well, but those are the core aspects to it. They can be jumping off points from there, depending on the specifics of the actual case itself. But the protection that the Equality Act gives is that an employer must not discriminate or victimize a person 3 ways here. So in the arrangements that they make for deciding to whom to offer employment, as to the terms on which they offer employment, or by not offering employment. So I'm going to break that down into the 3 core tests here. So in the arrangements that they make. So this covers the whole of the recruitment process. So the approach taken. So it's likely to include the format and content of the application form, the physical arrangements for location in terms of the interview itself, the timing of the interview, and the job and the person specifications that are raised as well. So the arrangements that you put in place for determining who to employ within your organization. And ones that we've seen recently have been, say, an AI system, which filters out applicants based on their written CV. So that in turn could exclude disabled candidates if they're put to a disadvantage on the basis of their written ability. So that's where monitoring would come in place to check whether or not people are being unlawfully excluded. I had this as an active example I had as a woman with a childcare responsibility who was required to attend an interview outside of school hours. So she raised that case. I've got childcare responsibilities. I can't attend that interview, and then that caused a dispute between her and her potential employer, which then unfortunately broke down. So looking then at the terms upon which they are offered employment. So that requires an employer to ensure that the terms that are offering are fair across all employees, and do not subject one particular group of people to less favourable treatment or less favourable terms because of a protected characteristic. The most common example here is the gender pay gap, paying someone less because of their gender, but it does extend across the entirety of the protected characteristics too. Just gender pay gap is the one that's most heavily monitored. They're also looking at by not offering employment. So you can't not hire someone because they're pregnant. You can't not hire someone because of their age. You can't not hire someone because of their religion or their belief. You have to monitor the reasons if you're not choosing to offer somebody employment. It has to be something that's not intrinsically related to a protected characteristic. And a lot of that goes into understanding why a certain manager has made a decision in a certain way. So that manager themselves also has to understand why in which they've taken that decision. As I said before, the golden rule is always to have everything documented down. It's a darn sight easier to say why you made a decision at the time if you have notes written at the time about why you made that decision. If you've been sued in an employment tribunal and you come into it 6 months later, and you say to a judge, yeah, but at the time I made this on this basis, but I understand my memory's faded, because actually during this period of time, a lot of stuff has happened to me. A judge will be more likely to find against you than if you had a document at the time that said why you made that decision. So I suggest creating a pro forma to use within a recruitment process. It specifies out why the decision was taken at the time and then signed off by that recruitment manager. So looking then at who can discriminate. So who can discriminate in these circumstances? A company can discriminate. They can be found liable for discrimination itself in the way in which they organise their recruitment strategy. The employees of the employer, they can also discriminate as well. So an employer will be vicariously liable for the actions of their employees, i.e. they're liable insofar as the employee does that action in line with their terms of employment. So they're doing something during the course of their employment, then an employer is normally liable for it. So not only would the employer be liable for discriminatory action in that circumstance, the individual employee would be personally liable as well. They chose to discriminate against someone during the recruitment exercise. But an employer can also be liable for the actions of their recruitment agencies as well. So if consultants or employment agencies which carry out an employer recruitment exercise discriminate against a future employee, either by the filtering those candidates down on the basis of a certain characteristic, so not applying someone who would have children, not applying someone who's of a certain age, not applying someone who doesn't quite fit the criteria of the job role for the fit or culture reasons, that could be discriminatory. If that's done for an employer by a recruitment agent, then the employer is also liable for that as well. So how can an organisation easily avoid discrimination in recruitment? They simply need to be objective, clear and fair. And so my final slide today is going to run through a fair and inclusive recruitment process. And as if by magic, it comes on screen. That was beautiful, Fiona. Thank you. Absolutely seamless. So I'm going to go through here what I think my core tips for making sure that we have a fair and inclusive recruitment strategy. So identifying the vacancy. An employer may decide to recruit in a number of different circumstances. So an outgoing employee, a change in role after someone leaves, business growth or temporary cover. In all those instances, the job description, the identification of the vacancy needs to be closely reviewed. And if they found to have changed, a new description needs to be drafted. So in the current climate, we've seen a massive increase in working from home, which should be considering the location of the job role in which that can be performed. Employees may be used to having flexible working, which then relieves the pressures of childcare and encourages a more healthy work-life balance. It's definitely an area which has become more common in employment and something which should be clear if it's an option or not an option in relation to that job role. So when you identify the vacancy, work out whether or not this can be done from home. If it can't be done from home, it is worthwhile stating in the identification or the job advert itself why it cannot be undertaken from home. This will filter out the people who will be able to apply for it as long as that reasoning is objective. It also prevents you from having the difficult conversation later on of, can this be done from home? No, why not? And then having to work through that with a new employee, which can just simply cause ill feeling. So preparing a job description and person specification is a key aspect for a fair recruitment strategy. So the European Human Rights Commission has made some recommendations with the aims of avoiding claims for unlawful discrimination and to help improve diversity. So looking first then at job descriptions themselves. So employers should make sure that the job title is appropriate. and does not show a predetermined bias for recruiting people with a particular characteristic. The job description should accurately describe the job. Don't include duties or responsibilities that they do not in practice expect the successful candidate to routinely carry out. There should also be enough information in that advert or in that description to allow the applicant to make an informed decision about the role they're applying for. They also encourage to focus on outcomes. So don't specify the means of achieving the required tasks if there are numerous different ways that can be approached, but instead state the necessary outcomes for that role. What do we want that role to achieve? And avoid specifying unnecessary working hours or patterns. This ties back in considering the potential state that it's a flexible role. Looking then at person specifications, this can fall down in terms of trying to recruit the right person. So again, if you're looking at trying to get as non-discriminatory criteria as possible, so you consider each aspect of what the role entails and whether or not they can be objectively justified based on what you understand that role to be. So don't include wholly irrelevant criteria with a view to limiting applicants from certain backgrounds. Don't overstate the level of qualification required, and make sure that you have qualifications that are equivalent as also being acceptable. Include criteria capable of being tested objectively. So if you're going to include a phrase like leadership, for instance, needs to have leadership qualities, then you're going to have to be able to define that in terms of measurable skill or experience. And don't include criteria related to health unless that can be objectively justified. So the way I always approach these and the recruitment processes that I've been involved in for clients, if someone sends me a job advert or a person specification, what I do is I go through and I base it on the way in which I would cross-examine that person if they're in front of me in an employment tribunal. I go through and say, you've asked for 5 years experience. Why do you need 5 years experience? And that person comes back and says, it's for this reason. I say, well, what about someone with 1 year's experience? Why would that be any different? And what you're doing is you're quite confrontationally trying to go through that process and look to see what the reasoning is for those particular criteria. There can get the time you have this document fatigue where everyone's looking through it and they're like, yeah, that's fine. We've always used that job description. There's going to be no problem with it at all. Yeah, we need 10 years experience. We need someone who's really suitably qualified. And that just gets pushed out. And it has the effect of excluding people from being able to apply to the job role, which in the current recruitment market is not a good idea. But B, it also has the issue we have people who are serial litigants. People will be looking for those vacancies, say, well, actually, I've got experience in this. Mine's 5 years experience, but actually that's recognized by the industry as being the highest level of experience you possibly get. And everything else on that is just beneficial. So you saying you want 10 years excludes me from doing that. And that's on the basis of my age. And you can see how they all come out. But if we can objectively justify those points, challenge them internally, or take advice from somewhere where someone can run through those steps with you and say why. It's better knowing that now than it is knowing it in front of a judge or trying to explain that later on when you're on the stand. So when you've come for who to select the role, there should be a selection criteria. So again, I'm talking here a lot about documentation. So there should be a policy in place about how we do recruitment. An ethical recruitment policy is probably what I would call it, making sure that we avoid any aspects of discrimination on the grounds of protected characteristics, understanding why we're taking decisions in set ways and training our managers. But once we've got the person specification, we've got the job description down, we've got the advert done, we're also then looking at the selection criteria. So we're making sure that the person we're selecting for the role is based on clear, objective, and measurable criteria. And it's designed to draw out the evidence for the required skills, knowledge, and experience for doing that role. We want to make sure that we're not putting candidates with a particular characteristic at a disadvantage, and we're drafting this as widely as possible to ensure that we've got a big pool of suitably qualified candidates. And no, we're not specifying that we want someone to attend from a certain university or someone who's achieved a certain set of A levels. We're considering, well, we want someone who's educated in this field. How can that come about? Can that come about from someone who's been to university? Yes, that's fine. Can it come about from someone who's done a different means of learning? Yeah, that's fine. Can it come about from someone who's done on-the-job training in a specific area? Yeah, that's also fine. And it stops us from just simply saying, we want experience in that area, understanding what experience we actually need for that role. I want to make sure as well, I do see this quite a bit, it's not using subjective terms in selection. So the common one that I come across is things like chemistry or fit within the team. So it's trying to avoid an employer just recruiting in its own image. So if we're looking and saying, well, look, we want someone who's going to blend into our team quite well and not kind of upset the apple cart because we want a safe pair of hands at the moment. Putting something like fit into the team, it can either put people off, or there's a potential there to say, well, look, you don't want someone from a different cultural background, and therefore that's discriminatory. So rather than putting things in like chemistry or fit, they could be better described as commitment to the employer's values, or experience of developing effective relationships and building trust, or the ability to question in a constructive way. Those aspects are what you want to achieve from the statement of saying fit into the team, but they're not exclusionary, and they are objective and measurable as well. So when we're looking at going through the vacancy itself, we want to make sure that if we have any occupational requirements, that they can definitely be justified. So discrimination legislation does allow you to objectively justify some elements of indirect discrimination. So if you have, say, like a height requirement on a job site, you have to be over 6 foot. Potential that excludes people who are shorter than 6 foot, which would predominantly be women. As long as that can be objectively justified and is necessary for health and safety in a set way, then that's fine. I mean, the common example that we use from that would be it was a Chinese restaurant, selling Chinese food, wanted to keep the ambience, so they only wanted to hire Chinese staff. That excluded everyone else who wasn't Chinese. That was found by the employment tribunal to be acceptable because the objectively justifiable criteria was to keep the ambiance in the restaurant. That's fine. But those things are few and far between. You need to be able to properly justify them. So I definitely recommend taking some advice from somewhere if you've got a genuine occupational requirement and it seems on its face to be discriminatory, to make sure that it's not going to be found to be discriminatory later on. When you're advertising the vacancy as well, part of our recruitment and lawful and effective strategy is going to be to widen out the pool to make sure we get the most of the possible candidates as well. So we're not going to publicize it from just the friends or the people that we know. We'll put it on social media. We use different channels, not simply just LinkedIn. We're looking at different channels like YouTube or TikTok or Reddit, looking for someone who might have a different skill set than we would normally draw from. Use a recruitment agency that's got experience of or a good track record of bringing people in from a diverse range of candidates, but also considering outreach initiatives to encourage applicants from underrepresented groups. So we've monitored our processes. We found that actually we're not recruiting from a certain type of person, potentially social mobility, different race, different religious background, and we want those people in our organization. So what we're going to go and do is empower our manager to go and attend networking groups in that area, attend recruitment events in that area, go seek different types of universities, outreach programs within schools and colleges to get people coming to our business from that group. That's, again, part of a lawful and effective recruitment strategy. When we come to shortlisting and interviewing as well, we want to make sure that it's all measurable. Measurable requirements, make sure we haven't got any irrelevant factors which don't relate to the job role. And ideally, on our interview panel, we want more than one person scoring them. We want if we can have a diverse interview panel as well to make sure there's a variety of views. And hopefully the key takeaway from this section as well is making sure that everything is done fairly, consistently. So fairly understands how we're making our decision. How is that going to be fair? Consistent means we apply it in the same way to everybody. So everyone gets a fair crack of the whip. Everyone gets the fair process used for them, and we measure them against the exact same criteria as well. When we make an offer of employment to them as well, we want to make sure that all the key terms are in writing. So if you're sending out an offer letter without a contract of employment, make sure that your offer letter will eventually match your contract of employment. You don't want to have a difference between the two, as it's just simply embarrassing. Contracts of employment are now a day one right. So anyone who starts at a new job has the right under the Employment Rights Act to be provided with their contract of employment at the day that they start. It is good practice to send it to them in advance of them starting to make sure that they have read it through, they understand the terms of it, there's no misconception about the contents or the benefits that they're going to be offered. It can be the case someone starts with you on the first week, they don't get a contract until later on, they then read through it and say, hang on, I'm not happy with this, and they're leaving at that point in time, or it just causes that ill feeling between employer and employee. That can be completely avoided by sending it to them in advance. So get your offer letter, contract of employment all set up, your key policies to send out. Obviously, my HR talk can definitely help you out with this type of thing as well. Keeping all the documentation in place so it's ready to roll at, a week before they start, it just avoids those potential issues coming through. And now I'm going to keep this on the bottom. This is my very last point here on this slide. Is keep a great paper trail. that is absolutely core here. If you've got an interview with someone and someone's taken notes, don't bin those notes. Those are part of the data protection aspect for that potential candidate, but also they can potentially be used to defend your position in an employment tribunal claim. If you say, I take all the notes that I've written out and I immediately shred them, you've lost that piece of information. You've lost the ability to say what those notes actually said. And especially as an employee will be sat across the table from you, say, I saw them scribble loads and loads of notes, and then that simply got shredded. That should be taken into account adversely. So the employer should be treated with a bit of suspicion because they've chosen to not provide notes that clearly did exist. I think they then said something really bad about me. And again, it's trying to avoid that because there's no need for it. And it's quite straightforward for us to simply keep that as a candidate pack, have all those notes in place to say why we took that decision. I mean, the European Commission's code on recruitment suggests that every selection decision, from shortlisting to appointment, are all equally important, and recommends that you keep records to justify each decision and the process by which it was reached. That can be quite an onerous task. If you're doing bulk recruitment, it can be quite difficult to keep those records. So get a pro forma. We use one with one of the clients I work with. It's simply the case. It just has the detail on there. It's got tick boxes on there to say why things matched up. It's got the guidelines for recruitment on the back of it to say what we were looking for. It's got the objective scores next to the recruitment exercise and a quick note to say why that decision was taken. It makes it really smooth. It's part and parcel of putting a structural change in place, but it means you've got the ability just to pull that document out, quickly run through it, and then after the first few times, it's 5 or 6 minutes of a manager's time, and you've got a documented record of why the decision was taken. I'm going to round up with one final point here, and that is training. It is a really good idea to provide employers, to provide your managers with regular training to carry out a fair recruitment process. The common examples that you see are preventing unconscious bias. So why do I make a decision like that? Is it something that's inherent within me that I don't like a certain characteristic of people? Or why am I making the decision that I'm making? Understanding that reasoning, but also then looking at promoting diversity as well, and how we can do more inclusive recruitment practices. So that's actually it for me. It is a massive whistle-stop tour through that. I'm not sure if I've gone over or not, but thank you all very much for listening. If you do have any questions that I've been through, please do drop in the Q&A. I'm not sure if any have popped up already.
Yeah, we have got some questions. Thanks very much, Toby. You've given us quite an overview in just a short space of time. And apologies again for the poll glitch at the beginning, but we did get the results eventually. I'm just going to launch another poll just before we go into the Q&A, just to find out if anybody would like any more information about how software can support with compliance. So feel free to answer that, and then we will go into the Q&A. We've got a few questions. Great, thank you. Right, I will just go into so we've got a few questions. So the first question, can we state the candidates must be able to speak or understand English due to health and safety reasons?
So that's potentially indirectly discriminatory. So it is a criterion that you're putting in place. So the need to speak a certain language potentially excludes people from different national origins, which would be a protected characteristic under race. The way in which you would justify that would be to say health and safety reasons. So what you'd have to have is a record of the objective criteria that you've used in order to come to that decision. Is there another means that you can use in order to ensure health and safety in the workplace without someone being able to speak or understand English, i.e., can we produce all of our safety documentation in a different language? Can we have recordings of our health and safety documentation provided to us by a translator? And then that produced those individuals, can we hire people to do interpretation? All those things are required if you're going to have that occupational reason in place. So you have to have assessed whether or not there is another non-discriminatory means of achieving the same outcome. And that has to be documented. So yes, you can in a very short answer, but there's quite a significant amount of work to be done in order to prove that. And the reason that you need that information is that so when someone does bring a claim against you and says, if you exclude him on those basis, you could have done all these things. You say, yeah, we considered all this. We spoke to these different outreach groups. We got costings. We simply couldn't afford to take that step. It was too many different languages, something along those lines. But you need to have put some effort into producing that documentation to ensure that you've got the proper reasonings for that.
Okay, and how long do you recommend keeping candidate details for unsuccessful applicants?
So I do data protection as well, and these things are you can keep them for as long as you want to, as long as you've told that individual. But my recommendation would be to simply remove it immediately. So if you don't need that information, you don't need that data, there is no point in storing it. If you are on a 6-monthly recruitment program where you think that person's not been successful at this point in time, but actually we know that in 6 months' time we're going to be recruiting again, and therefore we want to get in touch with them again, then I would probably leave it 9 months before I delete it to make sure that I've got a 6-month cover and that I can go back to it. It depends. If you've got volume recruitment, get rid of them straight away. If you're recruiting for a very specialist area, a very, very niche job that actually there aren't very many candidates for, and you've luckily found 2 people who've applied, you've hired 1, you might want to contact that candidate again and say, we're going to retain your details for the next 3 years because we think we're going to need you again in the future, and we'd really like to keep that on file. The problem with doing that for a longer period of time is that the UK GDPR requires you to only keep these where they are accurate. And someone might move during that time, and you will then have no way of knowing whether or not the data that you're holding on file is still accurate at the time you're holding it. If it's not accurate, you've got to delete it. So, the shortest amount of time possible is the golden rule. I would say at the end of the recruitment exercise, delete all the information that you've got as much as you possibly can. If you think it will be beneficial, as long as you've told the individual how long you're keeping it for, then it's okay. Keep it for the shortest amount of time.
Great, and I've just spotted another one in the chat. Do you have a suggestion of where we can download a template for the selection process?
I don't know. I mean, I guess ACAS might have a free one on there. If not, it's certainly something that I can help you out with. So drop me a line. My email address is on screen. I think for maybe CIPD, maybe ACAS. I'm not sure.
Okay, there's another couple of questions coming in now. So what if you set your data processor set to short term and it is stated on the candidate privacy? Does this mean that the candidate cannot make a claim after that period as they were informed?
I'm not quite sure what you're grabbing at there. I think what I need to say is if you've told someone that you're going to keep their data for a set period, then at the end of that period of time, you're required to delete it. If in your privacy notice, you have a statement that says that you will use a certain metric to decide, i.e. we will keep your data until the end of its useful period, i.e. that will be the end of this recruitment process and any future recruitment process that we might have in place, and then we will delete it, you have to have some means of assessing what that timescale is going to be. So, the candidate itself, what we'd normally do for any recruitment process is keep it for at very least 3 months. 3 months is the timescale to bring a claim in the employment tribunal. That's slightly extended by the ACAS early conciliation process. So probably a 6-month period of time would be beneficial for the notes on that. But it depends on the different categories of data. It's like if you're just getting a random CV through, you might want to be telling that person we're going to delete this pretty much straight away because we're not actively recruiting. So apply for a job role. If it's a speculative CV, you might want to keep it for a couple of months. If it's an interview note, you probably want to keep it for 6 months. But that's part and parcel of your retention schedule for data protection compliance, is deciding on each different category of that data and what are we going to keep from it. And it might well be that what we can do is get around all this by saying, well, actually, we're going to bin your CV because you don't really need a CV. We're just going to keep your email address. You name your email address and the job role that you've applied for. That minimizes the data down, and then we've got a decent way of then contacting people with a new job role in the future. This is how we're then going to process your data. But that should all be transparently recorded. And a lot of times I say it's with data protection, you just got to think up what you're doing and then write it down. And as long as you've done that, it normally complies with the obligation towards transparency, and then you just need a data protection lawyer or some sort of service just to tailor that to make sure it fits with the UK GDPR.
Okay. Next question, we use a software system called Pochron, which stores CVs from CV library that we can search from. How is this best managed?
So again, that needs to be covered by data sharing agreement between the company and Bullhorn, because you'd have to work out who is processor and who is controller in that scenario. But if you're pulling CVs from a separate library, as long as there's a privacy notice in place that tells the candidate where that information is coming from, and it might well be that Bullhorn keep them indefinitely, or they say, well, actually, we're going to keep them until you tell us to delete them, because we're going to have a continuing obligation to you to ensure that we're seeking you work, and we will refresh this every so often. I think what you need to be doing is assessing the contractual relationship between yourselves and Bullhorn, the privacy notice at the opposite end between Bullhorn and the candidates themselves, and then the link between you and them, and what our privacy notices say as well. So probably a good idea to do a data map on that to see where the information is coming from, what we do with it at our end, what Bullhorn do with it at their end as well. Document that and make sure it fits within our privacy notices too.
Okay, and one final question. If we get rid of as soon as we have hired, how would we have a defence against unfair recruitment and discrimination?
So I guess when you've hired someone, they become your employee. So you can retain their information in a different way, because you'd be giving them an employee privacy notice rather than a candidate privacy notice. So again, there'll be different categories of information. So if you're just getting a random CV through, I'd be getting rid of it as soon as you possibly can. You keep it to the end of the recruitment process. If you're not going to use it at all, simply get rid of it and it's gone. If you're keeping it for someone who's been unsuccessful at interview, as I said, keep it for at least 3 months, probably 6 months, to make sure you've got a defence for a discrimination claim too. But at the end of that period, that's when they get rid of it. But yeah, if you get notified of a potential claim within the 6-month period, that will take you over to a different category, because then I would want to then retain that for a longer litigation period for 6 months, etc. So I think that again, there are different categories of data and different ways to deal with it. But again, that should all be documented out within your privacy notice.
Okay, I said it was a final question, but one more's just come in, so we'll just cover off this one. So earlier you said gone are the days where you can just keep CVs on file with a view to contact applicants if vacancies arise. Could you expand on what you mean by that? Is that not still okay if you have permission to keep CVs on file?
Yeah, so you can have a permission to keep a CV on file from someone to potentially give them a new role in the future. That's fine, but that can't last in perpetuity. So it can't last for forever. What companies used to do was just say, thanks for your interest. We'll let you know if there's another recruitment exercise in the future. You don't know at the time when you've processed that data whether or not it's still accurate. So if you don't know if a piece of data is accurate, you can't keep it under the UK GDPR. So you can't just simply retain a CV on file just in case. So you either need to assess a metric for how long you're going to keep things for, i.e. do we do recruitment processes every 6 months, 12 months, 18 months? Those are all fine. You can tell an individual to keep it for that period of time as long as it is clear and objective. If it's not clear or objective, then you're going to have to remove that CV from your system. And the ongoing obligation is to keep the minimum amount of data that you need. So data minimization. So do you, at the time when you're going to contact someone again about a different vacancy, need to keep the entirety of their CV? I don't think you do. I think you need to keep their name. I think you need to keep their email address, and that's it. And I think then you can mark them as a potential candidate, say, we're just going to keep this information about you. Is that okay? They then say, yeah, that's fine, give them the privacy notice, and then you can retain it for a bit of a longer period. At that point, you'd say, if you want to apply for a new role, send us in your new CV at that time, and that then take them into a different category of data. So again, it's just trying to assess that. But all that'll happen is, you go through a complaint with the ICO. So they complain and say, actually, what happened here is you kept all of my data and I only applied for that one role, and yet you've kept it for 3 years and I'm not happy with you doing that. And the ICO would come back and say, well, yeah, okay, what actually happened here is you stored all this irrelevant data that had no purpose, but the only bit that did have purpose was that email address. So we're going to give you a reprimand on that basis, or a potential fine. Very, very likely get a fine on that basis, but certainly a reprimand. And to be honest with you, it would be the time it takes to be involved in that and the potential naming and shaming that comes from it. So it's just about having that thought process in mind to make why have we got the data? What's the purpose? If that purpose is gone, do we have another purpose? Have we told them about that purpose? If not, we've got to delete it.
Okay, thank you, Toby. That's all we've got time for with questions. Everyone, please just thank Toby for his time and expertise today. So it'd be great to hear there's some messages coming in on the chat, some very positive messages, but yeah, let us know what you think. If you found this one useful, as I said before, we've got 2 compliance webinars coming up on the 6th and the 20th of April. So links to those will be in the chat, as well as a follow-up email where you'll get a full recording of today's webinar and further webinar dates. So thank you to everyone for attending, and yeah, have a great day.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks.
Bye-bye.